Alright, YouTube, it's time for another failure fresh out of Washington. Syria has, it's the last straw. They've crossed the red line. Now we've got to send more money and weapons and other forms of aid to the Syrians. Give them, I don't know, air support or something. And we've tried this before. We did it in the 1980s with Osama bin Laden. Little lost gem of wisdom. Osama bin Laden was labeled a freedom fighter back in the early and mid-1980s because he was fighting the Soviet Union. And we gave him billions of dollars in aid and said, well, he won't hurt us, we're helping him fight the Soviets. We're doing the same thing as a proxy war now in Syria. Of course, anyone who thinks we haven't been giving aid to the Syrian rebels for quite some time now is delusional. Of course we have. It was secretive, but I'm sure we've been doing it. Where else did they get a hold of some of the weapons they use? As far as Assad actually using nerve gas, how does this make any sense at all? The rebels are being beaten back inch by inch. They're slowly losing support. Assad is winning more ground, and all of a sudden he just randomly decides to use nerve agents. Something is strange here. It doesn't make sense to anyone who's possessed of a logical mind. You wouldn't do that. It wouldn't make any sense, especially knowing the consequence would be the international community comes in and wipes the floor with you. So I'm calling bullshit on the idea that Assad actually used sarin. More likely the rebels used it, and they were using not nerve gas, but they were using chemical agents several months ago, and it came out. At first they thought it was Assad. It turned out to be the rebels. And that was the general international consensus, that the rebels had been using it. And the international community didn't say, well, the rebels are using chemical weapons, so we have to destroy them because they're breaking international laws, so why are we saying the same about Assad when he supposedly uses them? Which any reasonable person would say, no, he probably hasn't. I don't trust the government to tell me that he's using them. I don't want to see U.S. money going over there to people who are backed by Al-Qaeda. Because the rebels are backed by Al-Qaeda. They're executing and raping people in the streets. They're cannibalizing children. These are not the sort of people you want to give weapons and aid to. They say, well, some of these groups are moderate and those are only the extremists. No, they're not. These people are fighting for an Islamic state in Syria. They want Sharia law. They want a Sunni caliph-like state. That's what they want. And you can guarantee that there are several things that probably are going into this. The first thing is it's likely a distraction from the NSA scandal and the IRS scandal, because now, we've got another war going on. The media can cover that, and they can ignore these scandals that have been happening. So it's a little bit strange that luck would have it that suddenly Syria crosses the red line a few days after these scandals break. So bullshit on that one. Number two, you can guarantee that some combination of the Saudis or the Israelis or the CIA is behind all of this. Not to get into tinfoil hat territory, but the Saudi Arabians and their oil is one of the main reasons that we go into these countries, and we remove these various dictators or democratic regimes and prop up Islamo-fascists. We do that to please the Saudis because they control so much oil. And we would rather side, for some reason, we'd rather side with them than the Shiites, probably because they're already allied with the Russians, so we had to take what we could get. The Israelis, of course, would love to see Syria basically demolished. Assad is no friend to Israel and is right on their back door, right next door to them. So things are getting fishier and fishier and fishier. And really, Obama is outdoing himself at being Bush 2.0 now. Now, he had done things in the past that, of course, seemed to be kind of Bush-like, lying to people and, sort of underhanded warmongering and backing these groups of Islamo-fascists that are rising up all over the Middle East. We never quite learned how these people rose up in the first place. The vague, a YouTube video was responsible, and that was another lie. And things over there are going to shit, largely, and we never really found out why, but he's beginning to look a lot like Bush. You've got proxy war, you've got domestic surveillance, you've got drone strikes, warrantless wiretaps, scandals up the wazoo. I don't see any way he could look more like Bush, only slightly even worse than Bush at this point. Even Bush was dumber than a box of rocks, and he was a chronic liar, or I should say that Cheney, who was really in command, was a chronic liar. But he never got into this sort of territory in the entire time he was the president. And it's strange how I'm sure that there will be people in Congress that will bend over and suck Obama off and say, well, this is a great idea. And McCain is chief among them. Well, we gotta arm them rebels over there, because otherwise Assad is gonna attack the Israelis. Otherwise Assad is gonna gas his people. He's gonna use sarin nerve gas against his own people. We can't let this stand, America. It's our patriotic duty to go over there and institute Sharia law. Kick the dictators out. And that's basically McCain's line of reasoning, and everyone says, well, we've got to listen to McCain. He's a war veteran. His arms don't even go above his shoulders because he had some sort of weird torture applied to him, so we've got to listen to what he says, or we're, anti-patriots. We can't keep shelling out money for these things. From a strictly functional standpoint, just arguing from the economy alone, how are we paying for these things? How are we paying for all of these new IRS agents that apparently are being trained to use firearms for some unknown reason? How are we paying for this surveillance center in Utah? How are we going to pay to fund these rebels? How are we going to pay for it? We're already billions and billions and trillions of dollars in debt. To foreign countries, to people who hold bonds in this country, it's insane. We can't pay for all of these things. It's almost like nobody's there in Obama's brain right now, or the brain of any of those politicians. Nobody's home. The lights went out around September 11th and never came back on. These people seem to think we have an inexhaustible supply of money, an inexhaustible supply of citizens to go be sheep for the slaughter overseas. I think Obama has largely forgotten one of the reasons he was so popular, and one of the reasons he was elected by such a huge majority when he ran against John McCain, is because he appeared, at least on the surface, to be anti-war. People got tired of Iraq and Afghanistan. They got tired of seeing things blowing up in the Middle East and people coming home in caskets and people running around over there shooting each other, and they got tired of our involvement, and they definitely got tired of paying for it, especially when their taxes were on the line. And he's doing it again. He's doing what Bush did, and you can imagine what happens if we do send aid to these rebels, and then the Russians aid Assad. Are we going to restart the Cold War? The Cold War has continued. Of course, I pointed out, the espionage and the proxy wars and the Middle East conflicts, this all dates to the Cold War era. Osama dates to the time of Reagan, as far as his guerrilla tactics used against the Soviets. The things that are happening over there are purely Cold War. But it's not a surface, it's sort of an undercurrent of Cold War. We've been talking more amicably with the Russians. Of course, Bush was playing tennis with Vladimir Putin, which astounded a lot of people. How are you playing tennis with our enemies, even though they're not really an enemy? They're sort of just a strategic opposite in the region that just happens to want oil as much as we do. They're not going to, I don't think, nuke us. But do you really want to reheat the Cold War? Do you want to have, and there are apparently reports there may be already Russians on the ground in Syria. Do we really want to stir the hornet's nest here? And spend billions of dollars doing it, number one. Potentially lose lives, number two. And number three, potentially have these weapons fall into the hands of Al-Qaeda. It makes no sense. Al-Qaeda backs the rebels. There are several groups within the rebels that are essentially Al-Qaeda themselves. The rest of them, they're willing to take armaments from whoever is willing to offer them. Do you think that the moderate rebels over there, the so-called moderates, wouldn't bend over backwards to admit Al-Qaeda into their ranks if they promised to flesh them out and give them a few rocket launches? Of course they would. They're fighting Assad. They're trying to remove the Alawite from power, and you know as soon as they take power, the Alawite will either flee or be butchered. The 10 to 15 or whatever percent of people in Syria that consider themselves Alawite will be killed off. Apparently Obama has no problem with this. Just as Bush had no problem with the Shiites in Iraq getting beat up on by the Sunnis or the Baathists, Bush never saw a problem with this. He didn't care. And Obama sees no problem with it either. Their policies at this point are so similar, you have to wonder if somebody behind the scenes isn't orchestrating all of these events and using them both as puppets. And that's been sort of a tinfoil hat conspiracy theory that most people don't believe, but it starts to gain credibility when you observe that these two people, who were so polar opposite one another during the campaign seasons when they ran, have such drastically similar beliefs in practice when they actually take office. I do not believe we should arm the rebels or send them any form of aid. We should do absolutely nothing in Syria. We should let Assad do whatever he wants. Number one, it's sovereign territory. It's not really our fight. Number two, it's going to cost too much. Number three, what's the alternative to Assad? Islamo-fascist Al-Qaeda agents taking over the country? That sounds a whole lot better. We tried it in Afghanistan and it failed. And then we got 9/11, which reheated the Cold War and started all of these fucking problems to begin with. All of our modern problems right now are direct results of 9/11, which is a direct result of, in turn, arming Osama and not simply letting the Soviets slaughter him. It would have been better to let the Soviets take over Afghanistan when they were going to collapse anyway, and stop fighting proxy wars against them. And the same goes, ironically, for Vietnam, where we also fought a proxy war for quite some time, before finally we were forced to drop troops there. Do you want to see more troops dropped in Syria to go get blasted, sandblasted out in the desert, get shot in the head and come home in caskets, all while spending billions of dollars doing it? It just doesn't make any form of sense whatsoever. It's something that all Americans should oppose, and from what I'm seeing, I'm not seeing really anybody supporting it. Most people right now are even ignoring the NSA scandal. They're basically telling Obama to go fuck himself and all the other people in his administration because they're tired of war. And I wouldn't be surprised to see massive protests as a result of it. This is just the next thing in line that I predicted yesterday. Something strange would happen and people would be even more disgusted at the government than they already are. Well, I was right. Here it is. And there's probably more coming. And you never know. Maybe a leak comes out. By the way, it wasn't Assad. A month after we get there and troops have already started dying. Oh, by the way, Assad never had chemical weapons. The rebels got it from, some other source, and they were using it against Assad's forces. But nobody told you because it was classified. It's crazy. Peace out.